Well, I thought I'd have a rustic setting this morning. Um, I'm still in my dressing gown, although it's already after 8 o'clock. But the weather has been so inclement in Britain lately, and I've discovered that if I feed my wood burner with charcoal rather than wood, it keeps the heat in beautifully. And it was burning, or I think I fed it yesterday at about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, evening, and that was the last time. And I came up into the workshop one more time before going to bed, but it was still warm. And this morning even, it was still 3 or 4 degrees warmer in here than it is outside, whereas normally the temperature would be the same. So the stove was still not hot, but it was warm, and I've just lit it again. I don't know. It's just nice being in here with the real fire going rather than just the central heating or some electric blower in the house. And I'll read the third chapter of Proverbs to keep up with my idea of reading a chapter for every day of the month. There are many things that come to my mind as I read through the verses, and sometimes I'd quite like to sort of stop and talk about them, but I'm a bit reluctant to do that because it's sort of interfering with the flow of the words. So perhaps I'll do another video sometime when I'll go back and talk about just specific phrases of the Proverbs. What I've been doing the last couple of times, I read them in Italian. I read the proverb in Italian first, or the chapter, and that's actually really interesting because what happens is that I'll see a word in Italian and I'll think, I wonder, and then I'll, when I read it in the authorized version, it becomes clearer to me, or at least my attention is focused on it. In the second proverb, I think at a certain point, that speaking of a wayward woman, that she abandoned the guide of her youth, says the King James, whereas the Italian Bible speaks of the companion of her youth. And in fact, the notes do say that guide and companion. But to my mind, when it says she abandons the companion of her youth, it sounds almost like a divorced woman. Whereas with guide, I didn't get that impression. So that's interesting to reflect. Because women, of course, in the olden days, by the time they were 17 or 18, they would be married and they would have their companion and their man. And so it was. And then they would lead a life in which they knew only their husband. I suppose it sounds very dull to women these days. I don't know how they view it. But that's how it was, isn't it? And that is, I think, it's the best path of contentment, isn't it, for a woman? As far as I can gather it, to raise a family and to trust totally in her husband and to work to support the family. I think that's the most productive and positive outcome, and the joy and happiness that will come from it cannot be equaled by any forays into the corporate world. And of course, looking after the household and the clothing and the perhaps the vegetable garden and the chickens and all the rest of it. I mean, it would have been quite a, there would have been no boredom, I think. I don't know how people are meant to live, but we're living in a very odd way at the moment, and I wonder whether really it seems as though our lives have been ransomed, and the controllers are looking to just destroy us completely. Um, and I suppose that would be biblical to believe that. So we need to rally somehow. The general election is coming up in this country in a few days' time, but I don't like to vote. I don't think voting helps at all. In fact, I think it's a problem. I don't believe in the idea of democracy. Um, I'm a monarchist in terms of my idea of social organization, uh, or really, I do they call it theonomy? I believe that the Bible governs our social order, and we should, you know, arrange our government in accordance with its teachings. But I suppose that won't be happening before the next general election, which is in 3 days' time, when some actor will be placed upon the stage. They're already lined up. I don't know who they are. I don't care. For theatre, I prefer to watch Neighbours or something like that, because I know it's theatre and it's more interesting. It sickens me to my stomach to see some of the things, to hear some of the things that are said, but it helps me understand what we're up against, as it were, and the wickedness that has been poured out upon our people. And it's been poured out because of our faithlessness and our turning away from God. That's what the Bible teaches so clearly, time and time again. But of course, nobody reads the Bible, or nobody believes the Bible, or very few people do. Even in church, they don't really seem to follow it with any passion and understanding. Certainly not related to the way that the country is governed, which is abominable. But perhaps we're coming to the end of the process now. An interesting thing occurred to me yesterday. I was thinking, well, what are satellite phones, and how do they work? Because, of course, the official story is that satellite phones sort of telephone directly to a satellite, and the signal is bounced off a network of satellites that are just hovering somewhere above our heads, 400 miles in the air, I think, tethered apparently. And that can't be so, because there are no satellites, although, of course, there are sataloons, and there are high-flying aircraft that are just constantly in the air. I think they just fly 24 hours a day. I mean, presumably in shifts and all over the earth and at very high altitudes, so they don't interfere with commercial traffic. But they are able to relay signals to the Earth-based system. And it's interesting because, in the early days when we had the old Nokia phones, and they used to work really well, you could telephone somebody and they would answer, and you'd hear them and they would hear you. And we had a very good system. We didn't seem to have any. There would be an occasional, phone mast, I suppose, but here where I'm living now, these 5G towers have been erected. there must be 4 or 5 within 5 minutes, or at the most 10 minutes walk from my house. They're just all around. They can't seem to put enough of these horrible things in with their cabinets that emit a great hum as you walk past them. And of course, there is a lot of skepticism about what their true purpose is. Conspiracies would say that they are designed to control and even kill us. I don't know what they are, but they're not improving the telephone network at all, because many people are finding, and certainly I'm finding, that the phone calls just drop out nowadays, and it becomes more and more difficult to hear people. It's not nearly as clear as it used to be, and it makes me wonder. And people are shifting, apparently. People with enough money are moving on to satellite phones because they're far more reliable, although they cost a fortune, whereas the phones that we use have become quite economical to use. You can get a monthly subscription, and the data is more expensive, but the voice calls are quite cheap. But it seems we're not going to be allowed to use voice calls anymore. I mean, I suppose that it's not in the interest of our rulers to promote discourse and conversation, free conversation among people. So phones are useful when you use them as a payment system. They work very well for all that sort of stuff. But to actually have conversations with one another, it seems we are going to be hampered by all sorts of problems. And so perhaps the old Nokia phones, a satellite phone, if you look at it, it looks like an old style mobile phone with just a small screen and a keypad, a physical keypad. So perhaps the wealthy will move over to those phones more and more, where they'll be guaranteed the ability to talk to one another. And the poorer members of society who can't afford those things will be prevented gradually from using their phones at all for conversation, because it will become impractical. So therefore the towers that are being erected, what are they for? They haven't improved the telephone network, have they? They might have improved the payment system through the phones. I don't know about that. They're certainly quite menacing and unpleasant things to have around us. And very heavily guarded as well. I was contemplating this yesterday when I live near a ford, and it's in a quiet sort of country lane, although we're in the city. And there are some people who will go down there in a transit van or something similar and unload some filthy rubbish from a building project and just leave it there in some unsightly heap of old sodden mattresses and all the rest of it. It happens not infrequently. And of course the councils, people will telephone, and so the council come and pick it up. It's a silly system, very wasteful. And the council could stop it, I think, quickly if they wanted to, simply by installing high-mounted cameras. I'm not a fan of those things, but in that area perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea, because the fly tipping is so pervasive, and it is an area of natural beauty. But no, there are no cameras there. The council hasn't installed any, although there have been calls for them, as they say. But you can't go near a 5G tower without being filmed by some camera or another. So it shows where their priorities lie. They don't care about natural beauty. They don't care about the environment. Control seems to be the thing that they're interested in. and eradication, destruction of our freedoms and our lives. And I don't know how it's all going to come to an end. I think it will come to an end. Perhaps their powers will diminish as our powers increase, and more people begin to call upon the name of the living God, and that He will strengthen us and weaken our adversaries, and gradually bring about the much needed changes in our communities. You can't keep the children of God down forever. It has never been possible in the past, because there's always a remnant of people who will believe and pray. And I think that remnant is gradually increasing in this country. Britain was a very, very atheistic nation for a long time, but flat earth revelations and just medical emergencies and various supposed terror attacks and all the rest of it have had the unintended consequence of strengthening a group of people, perhaps not a huge group of people, but enough people to begin to reignite the flame of faith in this country, so we no longer have to rely on American preachers coming over here to guide us back, as has happened. And whether they're guiding us back or guiding us into bondage, unfortunately, I would have to say, guiding us into bondage. Some of these pastors in the States, I used to listen to Alistair Begg. I don't know whether anybody knows him. He's a kind of evangelist pastor somewhere up in the Detroit area, I believe. Is it? Or no, not Detroit. Where is it now? Oh, I can't remember. A fairly interesting area of America anyway, as far as I can tell from, watching videos about it. And some very posh houses around where he lives also. I listened to him quite a bit because he's an engaging speaker, and he, opened up the Bible in a way that I appreciated. When I used to listen to Timothy Keller, I listened to him. And I listened to him one time, and he was presenting a Bible that he endorses. I forget what it's called. And actually did a spot to promote this Bible. I'm sure he would have been very well paid for doing something like that. And I'm just amazed at the wickedness of that kind of an action by somebody who professes to carry the word of God and to bring it to people, that they would, do sort of endorse something that claims to be a Bible and of course isn't, because it's not at all our authorized version. It's some simplified version which has been prepared to better communicate. People don't understand how wicked this stuff is. It upset me. I haven't been able to listen to a single word of that man has said ever since, and that was several years ago now. I don't listen to any preachers. If I need to listen to some preaching, I just go up in the shed and speak, as I'm doing now, and I'm not really preaching, am I? I'm just ranting. God bless today. I'll read the Psalm in another video. I'll read Proverbs 3 in a second video. God bless.